Gettysburg, what an unbelievable battle that was. The Battle of Gettysburg, what an unbelievable, I mean, it was so much and so interesting and so vicious and horrible and so beautiful in so many different ways. It represented such a big portion of the success of this country. Gettysburg, wow. I go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to look and to watch. And the statement of Robert E. Lee, who's no longer in favor. Did you ever notice that? No longer in favor. Never fight uphill, me boys. Never fight uphill. They were fighting uphill. He said, wow, that was a big mistake. He lost his great general. And they were fighting. Never fight uphill, me boys. But it was too late.
That was former President Trump on the campaign trail in Pennsylvania on Saturday. I'm thinking, John Meacham, is there anything to say about what he said, or maybe we should just move on?
I don't think Shelby Foote put it exactly that way. I think that's a fair way to put it.
You know, Trump delivered that history lesson just outside Allentown, where at times he sort of stumbled along with his speech.
Just this week, it was reported that an illegal alien, and you just look at this, what's happening.
So in just hours, jury selection is set to begin in Donald Trump's hush money criminal trial in New York City. It is the first time in U.S. history that a former president will be on trial for criminal charges. Two sources with direct knowledge of the situation tell NBC News that 6,000 potential jurors will be subpoenaed to Manhattan criminal courts this week. Usually, about 4,000 jurors are called in a week. More than 1,500 will be called today. Not all of these potential jurors are intended for the Trump trial, though. But the increase in number can be attributed to the former president's trial. At a manufactured event at Mar-a-Lago with Speaker Mike Johnson, Trump said he intends to testify at the trial, though Trump's attorneys have yet to confirm or deny whether he'll do so. That's the Speaker of the House with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And there's Stormy Daniels. Trump is accused of coordinating a hush money payment to that adult film actress, Stormy Daniels, during the 2016 election to keep quiet about an alleged sexual encounter. Trump was charged with falsifying documents to cover up that payment. He denies the charges and denies having had sex with Daniels. Joining us now, former Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division for the Southern District of New York, Christy Greenberg. She is an MSNBC legal analyst. Thanks for coming on this morning. I think let's start at the very beginning. A lot of people are going to really be focusing now that the trial is actually beginning. Can you explain what this is really about, and then how jury selection could really impact the process here and even the outcome?
Sure. So just to level set on a few things, making a hush money payment on its own, not illegal. Falsifying business records, that is a misdemeanor under New York state law. So the way we get to a felony here is that these falsification of business records, the checks that he signed, the general ledger entries, those falsifications happened in order to commit another crime. And here, that was in order to conceal an agreement among Trump and others to unlawfully influence the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. So what I am going to be looking for in this trial is not necessarily the falsification of business records. I think the documents are very good. The deception just kind of leaps from the page of some of these documents. They're using fake names, fake settlement agreements, fake invoices. You're really going to be looking for witness testimony to get you to that criminal intent, that these payments were there to influence the outcome of the election. So that is going to be a focus as we go through this trial. In jury selection, what are you looking for? You're looking for the person who could potentially hang this jury. In Manhattan, I think it is unlikely you're going to get an acquittal, but you could get one or two people who don't agree and hang this jury. So you are going to be looking for people that exhibit any kind of political bias in favor of Donald Trump. Have they voted for him? That's not a question, not what their political party affiliation is, but have they attended a rally? Have they Do they follow him on social media? What is their media diet? Various questions about whether or not they think that he's been treated unfairly in this case, that it is unfair to, criminally charge a former president of the United States. So that's going to be first and foremost what both sides are going to be looking for, as well as people who have a distrust of the law enforcement and the justice system, people who are very opinionated, lawyers. You want lawyers off the jury. So those are the kinds of people that both sides will be looking for. Prosecutors will want to keep those people off the jury, and the defense will want them on in the hopes of a mistrial.
All right, let's bring in former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin from outside the courthouse in New York City. Lisa, finally, you've been leading up to this and giving us context, but today is the day that it begins. What will you be looking for?
Well, Mika, a lot of what I'm going to be looking for is what happens before the first prospective juror even walks into the courtroom. We understand that because over the weekend, Trump was on his Truth Social account making numerous posts about prospective witnesses, there could be this morning some discussion about those posts and what the consequences could be for any violation of the gag order. We also expect, based on correspondence that Trump's lawyers sent late last week, that they could say to Judge Juan Merchan, hey, we know that you finalized your jury instructions and your protocol for selecting the jury, but we still don't think it's fair because you're going to allow anybody who says they're unable to serve to walk away scot-free, and that's not good enough for us for appellate purposes. We need to be able to distinguish between the person who says, I'm unable to serve because I've got a 3-month-old at home, and the person who says, I'm unable to serve because I couldn't possibly be fair and impartial here. So look for those morning proceedings to take up a good and healthy amount of time this morning. And of course, where the gag order is at issue, you know that the former president is very impassioned about that. So I'm also looking to see, can he control his temper even in this first day of trial?
Lisa, talk about the jury selection a little bit more, because it's really hard to believe that there are 12 and 6 alternates out there who actually don't have an opinion about Donald Trump already or have an opinion about this case already. So how are they going to try and what are the kinds of questions they're going to be asking them to try and get to people who really could be fair jurors in this trial? And also, what happens to that person who wants to sit on the jury in order to try and swing it one way or another and may lie about their own background? How do they weed them out?
Well, let's start with your second question first. How do you suss out the people who are lying? Sometimes people can't help themselves, and they will answer questions even against their own self-interest of getting themselves on a jury. I am reminded of the second E. Jean Carroll trial, where there was a prospective juror who exactly met that description. Person very much wanted to serve on the jury, but had to answer truthfully a series of questions that revealed that on balance, that person couldn't be fair and impartial. There were just too many different factors that showed not only a feeling one way or the other, but Kathy, an intensity of feeling. And that's really what this selection process is designed to ferret out. It's not, can you find 12 people and 6 alternates who are not biased in some way or another walking in the door? Everybody in America has a feeling about Donald Trump. I think you would be, as you noted, hard-pressed to find someone who's neutral. The question is, can people set those feelings aside and be fair and impartial when they join with 11 others on a jury? The questions on balance are designed to help the lawyers and the judge ferret that out, so that there are very few questions on this jury questionnaire in and of themselves that would be disqualifying. One that I can think of is the question about, do you belong, for example, to the 3 percenters or to the Boogaloo Boys? That may show a disinclination toward, first of all, the government, but also a feeling about former President Trump and the 2020 election, et cetera, that may make it hard for a person to serve. But very few others of them by themselves would disqualify someone. What you're looking for is someone who answers a battery of questions in a way that you can say, given this person's answers to questions X, Y, and Z, they cannot be impartial as a member of the jury.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.